My name is Thessaly Whitlock, but everyone calls me Thess. I'm 63 years old, and I need to tell you about the most shocking 3 months of my life. It started when my younger brother Caspian showed up at my door in September, looking like he'd been living on the streets. His clothes were filthy, his hair was long and matted, and he smelled like he hadn't showered in weeks. My husband Meridian and I live in a quiet suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. We'd been retired for 2 years, enjoying our quiet life after I spent 40 years teaching elementary school. Caspian stood on our porch with a backpack and tears in his eyes. He told us he'd lost everything. His wife had left him, he'd been fired from his job, and he'd been sleeping in his car for 3 months until it got repossessed. He begged us to let him stay just until he got back on his feet. I hadn't seen Caspian in almost 5 years. We'd had a falling out over money he'd borrowed and never repaid. But standing there looking at him, all I saw was my little brother who'd been my best friend growing up. Meridian was hesitant. He pulled me aside and reminded me about the borrowed money and Caspian's history of questionable business deals. But I convinced him. Family is family, I said. We can't let him live on the streets. Meridian agreed, but only for 3 months. That was the deal. 3 months to get a job, save money, and find his own place. Caspian was so grateful he actually cried. He hugged me tight and promised he wouldn't be any trouble. He said he'd clean up, find work, and be out of our hair before we knew it. We set him up in our spare bedroom, the one we'd been using for storage. The first week seemed normal. Caspian showered, shaved, and started looking human again. He borrowed some of Meridian's old clothes and spent his days supposedly looking for jobs online. He'd sit at our kitchen table with his ancient laptop, typing away. He was polite, helped with dishes, and kept to himself. Meridian started to relax a bit. Maybe this would work out after all. But then I started noticing small things that didn't add up. Caspian would get phone calls and step outside to take them, talking in low voices I couldn't hear. When I asked who called, he'd always say it was just someone about a job application. He also started disappearing for hours at a time. He'd say he was going to job interviews, but he never came back with any details about the companies or positions. When I asked specific questions, his answers were vague. One afternoon in the second week, I was putting away laundry and accidentally knocked over Caspian's backpack in his room. Papers spilled out across the floor. As I gathered them up, I noticed they weren't job applications. They were real estate listings, property assessments, and photographs of expensive homes. Some had notes written on them with prices circled. I heard footsteps and quickly stuffed everything back in the bag. Caspian appeared in the doorway with a strange expression. I apologized for the mess, but he just smiled and said he was looking at houses to dream about for when he got back on his feet. His explanation made sense, but something about his tone felt off. That night, I mentioned it to Meridian. He thought I was being paranoid. Caspian's probably just browsing houses online for motivation, he said. Let the man dream a little. Week 3 brought more strange behavior. Caspian started receiving packages. Not many, just 1 or 2 a week, but they were always express delivery and he'd take them straight to his room. When I asked what they were, he said just some clothes and personal items he'd had in storage. But the boxes were small, not like clothing packages. I also noticed he'd started dressing better. New shoes appeared, nice ones. An expensive-looking watch. When I commented on it, he laughed and said they were gifts from an old friend who heard about his situation. I wanted to believe him. I really did, but my teacher instincts, honed over 4 decades of spotting when kids were lying, kept tingling. Something wasn't right. Meridian still thought I was overthinking things. He's getting back on his feet, Meridian said. Isn't that what we wanted? By week 5, Caspian's nighttime activities became impossible to ignore. I'm a light sleeper, and I started hearing him moving around the house at 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd hear the back door open and close. Once, I got up and peeped out the window. Caspian was in our backyard, on his phone, pacing back and forth. He was there for over an hour. In the morning, I confronted him. He claimed he had insomnia and didn't want to disturb us by watching TV, so he'd go outside for fresh air. Another reasonable explanation. Another lie that felt true enough to accept. But then the car started showing up. A black luxury sedan would park down the street twice a week, always around midnight. Caspian would leave the house, walk to the car, sit inside for 20 minutes, then return. I watched this happen 3 times before I told Meridian. This time, Meridian took my concerns seriously. We decided to confront Caspian together the next morning. But when we did, his explanation shocked us both. He admitted he'd been lying about being completely broke. He said he had some money saved but was too embarrassed to tell us. The midnight meetings were with a business partner named Darrow who worked night shifts and could only meet late. They were planning to start a small consulting business together. Caspian showed us legitimate-looking business plans and registration documents. He apologized for the secrecy and promised to be more transparent. He even offered to start paying us rent. Meridian seemed satisfied. I wanted to be, but something still nagged at me. If he had money, why had he shown up looking homeless? Why the elaborate story? When I asked, Caspian's face darkened. He said he'd been in a bad place mentally. Week 8 arrived, and Caspian announced he needed to go on a business trip for a few days. He said the consulting business was taking off faster than expected and he had to meet with potential clients in Los Angeles. He'd be gone from Thursday to Sunday. Meridian and I were actually relieved to have the house to ourselves again. As soon as Caspian left Thursday morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I went into his room and searched it thoroughly. What I found terrified me. Hidden in the closet behind his clothes was a lockbox. I couldn't open it, but it was heavy, like it contained something substantial. There were also business cards from offshore banking institutions, documents with legal terminology I didn't understand, and a burner phone. Yes, a second phone besides the one he carried openly. I took pictures of everything with my phone, then carefully put it all back exactly as I found it. I showed Meridian the photos that night. His face went pale as he scrolled through them. Offshore banks, legal documents, burner phones. This wasn't normal business startup stuff. We debated what to do. Should we confront Caspian when he returned? Should we ask him to leave? Should we contact the police? We decided to wait until he came back and demand a full explanation. If he couldn't provide one that made sense, he'd have to go. Sunday evening came and Caspian returned. He seemed energized, almost excited. He said the LA meetings went great and the business was definitely happening. He even showed us a contract on his phone, though I noticed he didn't let us look at it closely. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about those documents, that burner phone. Who was my brother really? What was he involved in? Week 10 brought the first really terrifying incident. I was home alone on a Tuesday afternoon. Meridian had gone golfing and Caspian was supposedly at a meeting downtown. The doorbell rang. When I opened it, a man in an expensive suit stood there. He was probably 50, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. He asked if Caspian Whitlock was available. When I said no, he handed me a business card. Tell him Quillen stopped by, he said. Tell him we need to finalize arrangements by the end of the month. Then he looked directly at me and added something that made my blood run cold. You have a lovely home, Mrs. Whitlock. I'd hate to see anything jeopardize it. He walked away before I could respond. I stood there shaking, staring at the business card. It said only, Quillen Mercer, Private Acquisitions, with a phone number. No company name, no address. When Caspian got home that evening, I showed him the card. His face went completely white. He snatched it from my hand and asked exactly what Quillen had said. I repeated the conversation word for word, including the veiled threat about our home. Caspian sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. Then he told us a story that made everything worse. He claimed he and Darrow had borrowed money from private investors to start their business. Quillen was one of those investors and was just checking on the progress. The comment about our home was probably just him being friendly, Caspian insisted. But I saw fear in my brother's eyes. Real, genuine fear. Meridian demanded to know how much money was borrowed and what these investors expected in return. Caspian claimed it was only $50,000 and they had a solid repayment plan. I didn't believe a word of it. Week 11, Meridian and I made a decision. We contacted a lawyer friend named Patricia, explained the situation, and asked for advice. Patricia was blunt. She said it sounded like Caspian was involved in something illegal, possibly money laundering or fraud. She strongly recommended we ask him to leave immediately and consider reporting our suspicions to the police. But here's where my loyalty to family clouded my judgment. I couldn't bring myself to turn in my own brother without concrete proof of wrongdoing. Meridian felt the same way. We decided to give Caspian until the end of his 3 months, which was 3 weeks away. But we made it clear, he needed to explain everything, pay back whatever debts he had, and leave. No extensions. That conversation did not go well. Caspian became defensive, accused us of not trusting him, and stormed out of the house. He didn't come back until the next morning. The tension in our house became unbearable. Caspian barely spoke to us. He spent all his time in his room or out at mysterious meetings. Meridian and I argued about whether we'd made the right choice not going to police immediately. Then, week 12 arrived and everything exploded. It was a Wednesday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard an engine sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. I looked out the window and my jaw dropped. A private jet was landing in the empty field across from our house. Not near our house, literally in the field directly across the street, which I didn't even know was possible for a small jet. Neighbors came out of their houses, staring. The jet landed smoothly, its engines powering down. Meridian rushed into the kitchen asking what the hell was happening. We watched together as the jet's door opened and stairs descended. Quillen Mercer stepped out of the private jet, followed by 2 other men in suits. They walked directly toward our house. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Meridian grabbed his phone, ready to call police. But before he could dial, Caspian emerged from his room, fully dressed in an expensive suit I'd never seen before. He looked at us calmly and said 4 words that changed everything. "I'm sorry I lied." Then he walked out our front door to meet Quillen and the other men. Through the window, we watched them shake hands, not like adversaries but like business partners. They talked for maybe 5 minutes while the entire neighborhood watched from windows and porches. Then Quillen gestured toward the jet. Caspian nodded, turned back toward our house, and to our complete shock, all 4 men walked toward our front door. They were coming inside. I wanted to lock the door and call police, but it was too late. They walked right in. Quillen smiled at me, that same cold smile from before. "Mrs. Whitlock, Mr. Whitlock," he said formally. "Thank you for your hospitality these past 3 months. Your brother has successfully completed his assignment." Meridian and I stood there frozen as Caspian finally told us the truth. He wasn't homeless. He'd never been homeless. He worked for a private investigation firm that specialized in real estate fraud. 3 months ago, they'd gotten a tip that our neighborhood was being targeted by a sophisticated mortgage fraud ring. Someone was identifying homes owned outright by elderly couples, forging documents, and taking out fraudulent loans against those properties. The victims wouldn't discover it until foreclosure notices arrived. Caspian had gone undercover as my homeless brother to investigate from inside the neighborhood. Everything had been an act. The dirty clothes, the fake desperation, all of it. He'd been gathering evidence for months. The room started spinning. I sat down hard on the couch. Meridian's face was red with anger. "You used us," he said to Caspian. "You manipulated your own sister." Caspian's expression showed genuine regret. He explained that they'd tried other investigation methods but the fraud ring was too careful. They needed someone who could legitimately move into the neighborhood and observe without suspicion. When Caspian suggested using his estranged sister's home as a base, his superiors approved it. He'd never been in danger. The midnight meetings with Darrow were actually debriefings with his handler. The packages contained surveillance equipment. The burner phone was his work line. Quillen wasn't a lone shark. He was Caspian's boss at the private investigation firm. And the private jet? That was how they transported evidence and key witnesses once an investigation concluded. They'd just arrested 4 members of the fraud ring that morning, including our actual neighbor 3 houses down. Quillen opened a briefcase and pulled out documents. "Your home was next on their target list," he said, sliding papers across our coffee table. They'd already created forged signatures and were days away from filing fraudulent loan applications against your property. If Caspian hadn't been here investigating, you would have lost this house. Meridian picked up the documents with shaking hands. I looked at the signatures. They looked exactly like ours. Perfect forgeries. The loan applications were for $250,000. The money would have been funneled offshore and we would have been left fighting foreclosure on a home we'd owned outright for 20 years. I felt sick. Caspian sat beside me. "I know you're angry," he said quietly. "I know I should have told you the truth. But if you'd known, you might have acted differently. The suspects were watching for any unusual behavior in the neighborhood. I needed your reactions to be genuine. Quillen explained that 17 families in our neighborhood had been targeted. Caspian's investigation had saved all of them. The arrests that morning were the culmination of months of work. Caspian had traced the fraud ring's operations, identified their methods, and gathered enough evidence for federal charges. Each suspect faced multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. They were looking at decades in prison. Meridian was still angry, but I could see it softening as the reality sank in. Our home had been saved. Our neighbors had been protected. And my brother, who I thought was a failure living off our charity, was actually a hero. Quillen handed us a check. "This is compensation for your cooperation," he said. "Even though you didn't know you were cooperating, you still provided valuable assistance to a federal investigation." The check was for $50,000. I stared at it, unable to process anything anymore. After Quillen and his associates left, taking Caspian with them to finish paperwork and debrief, Meridian and I sat in stunned silence. Our quiet retirement had been turned upside down. We'd been living with a federal investigator for 3 months without knowing it. Our home had nearly been stolen through fraud we never suspected, and my homeless brother had been protecting us the entire time while we pitied him. 2 days later, Caspian returned alone. He'd been given a week off after the operation concluded. He sat us down and apologized properly. He explained that the 5-year estrangement between us had been painful for him too. When this investigation came up and required someone in our neighborhood, he'd volunteered partly to reconnect with me. He'd hoped that after it was over, we could rebuild our relationship on honest ground. He never meant to hurt us, just to protect us. I didn't know whether to hug him or punch him. I did both. That was 6 months ago. Caspian has visited us 3 times since then. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship, though I don't think I'll ever fully trust him the way I did when we were kids. The neighborhood recovered from the shock. Some neighbors actually thanked us once they learned the truth about why a private jet had landed across the street. The 4 members of the fraud ring all pleaded guilty and are serving federal prison sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. We used the $50,000 compensation to finally take that trip to Europe we'd been planning. And I learned an important lesson at 63 years old. Family can surprise you in ways you never expect. Sometimes the homeless brother you take in out of pity is actually the brother who saves you from losing everything. Life has a twisted sense of humor that way. I still think about those 3 months sometimes, about all the little lies and suspicions, and I realize how close we came to disaster. But mostly, I'm just grateful my brother was there, watching over us, even when we didn't know we needed protecting. Looking back now, I understand why Caspian had to deceive us. If Meridian and I had known the truth, we might have treated him differently. We might have been too nervous, too obviously aware that something was happening. The criminals were watching our neighborhood carefully, and any suspicious behavior could have tipped them off. Still, it's hard to describe what it feels like to discover your entire reality was a performance. Every conversation we had, every moment I felt sorry for my struggling brother, every time I worried about his midnight meetings, all of it was based on a carefully constructed lie. Even though the lie was meant to protect us, it still hurt. The hardest part was forgiving myself for not seeing the truth sooner. As a teacher, I'd always prided myself on reading people well. But Caspian knew me too well. He knew exactly how to play on my guilt about our estrangement, my family loyalty, my desire to help. He knew I'd convince Meridian to let him stay. He knew we'd give him exactly the 3 months he needed to complete his investigation. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the people who love you have to hurt you temporarily to save you permanently. Caspian could have let another investigator take this case. He could have avoided the family complications. But he didn't. He chose to be the one protecting us, even if it meant damaging our relationship in the process. To anyone watching this who has a complicated relationship with family, I want you to know, people are rarely all good or all bad. My brother lied to me for 3 months. But he also saved my home, protected 17 families, and brought down criminals who'd stolen from countless victims. Both things are true at the same time. Trust is hard to rebuild once it's broken. Caspian and I are still working on ours. But I'm trying, because at the end of the day, he's still my little brother. And family, complicated as it is worth fighting for. The mortgage fraud ring Caspian helped expose had victimized over 200 families across Arizona, Nevada, and California, stealing approximately $47 million. All 4 arrested members are currently serving federal sentences. Caspian continues to work as a private investigator specializing in financial crimes. He and Thessaly speak regularly and are working to rebuild their relationship. Thessaly and Meridian's neighborhood formed a community watch program and educated themselves on protecting against identity theft and mortgage fraud. If you're concerned about mortgage fraud or identity theft, check your credit report regularly at annualcreditreport.com, monitor property records through your county assessor's office, report suspicious activity to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. Remember, not everyone who asks for help is who they claim to be. But sometimes that's because they're trying to help you. Before you go, I need to know something. What hit you the hardest? The betrayal? The moment everything fell apart? The twist you never saw coming? Drop it in the comments right now. And tell me what you want to see next. Medical fraud? Family secrets? Financial crimes? Hidden identities? Your ideas become our next stories. If this story kept you glued to the screen, hit that like button. If you want more shocking true stories that expose the truth, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Thanks for letting me share this story with you. The next one drops soon, and it's going to shake you even harder. See you there.